Reginald here. I really just hate the Thunderhammer. I mean, I love the Thunderhammer. And I am going to cover some of its upsides in this video, but I also hate the Thunderhammer. It's been in a sorry awful state since forever, and it really needs some love. Right now, the Thunderhammer is heavily outclassed in every category of damage except monstrosities. While a good martyrdom build and player using either Fury of the Faithful or Infiltrate can certainly extract value out of the weapon across a game, it simply underperforms in general across routine testing and scoreboard review, especially when not using martyrdom. The fantasy of the Thunderhammer is the fantasy of the single most powerful melee weapon in 40k. It is supposed to be able to annihilate even the most heavily armored enemies, including vehicles like tanks. If we translate this fantasy and lore into Darktide with a mind to balance, it should be the unrivaled king of boss busting, heavy and light elite sniping, specialist annihilating. The sad reality is Darktide's Thammer is that it's generally worse than the chain axes as key enemy smiters. It is simply less safe to use, and probably just kinda bad as a core weapon for general use purposes. Its key weaknesses include low mobility, mediocre reach, low elite damage for enormously high time cost swings which add together special activation, heavy attack, stacking of thrust, and self-stun on enemy impact, in order to deliver a supremely suboptimal damage to singular heavy elites and carapace targets, or severely overkilling lighter elites. If you're using heavy attacks, it won't kill them on light attacks. The light special attack actually has no use whatsoever, it's genuine trash. Another serious issue is that the monstrosities damage on the Thammers is absolutely insane, and you can totally eliminate any opportunity for other players to even engage with those monstrosities for an entire mission. Originally, the problems with the Thammer were less pronounced, as elite blobs were much smaller, and being able to kill a half of a Crusher patrol in 2 swings was quite a positive impact on your chances for victory. Nowadays, in the current Darktide balance, Crushers spawn in blobs of like 6 to 9 on high difficulty, and Ragers can blob out in the literal dozens. The reality is the slow and often imperfect clear rate for the Thammer, along with higher player risk from staging and recovering from each hit, results in abysmal real game performance. This weapon is literally just a one trick, suited for monstrous maelstroms and largely nowhere else. I am well aware that if you are a skilled player, you can make it work. We all know that about Darktide already, so hopefully we can get past the skill issue commentary here. The problem is it's almost always better to use something else, and this is supposed to be the best melee weapon. Okay, so we're going to do this discussion a little differently than I've tried doing in the past. I've organized my thoughts into a product design document of a kind. So let's start with a vision for the weapon. Vision. This weapon should be the first choice for sniping anything big and elite. It should be able to do so at a good pace. Since this is a zealot-only weapon, a certain amount of safety risk can be tolerated, but shouldn't be high enough to be prohibitive into large groups of elites. It should be a boss killer when combined with class abilities, but shouldn't be so strong that it is a total boss one-shot machine. In exchange for all this power into elites and heavily armored or tough enemies, the weapons should feel unwieldy, slow, and generally have poor clear into hordes and trash mobs. In many ways, this weapon already satisfies this vision, as it is primarily a slow clear stagger tool when unempowered. However, it lacks reliable highs, even failing to kill scab gunners on headshot with a charged light attack or maulers on headshot with thrust 4, 3 stacking a heavy charge attack. I'm generally satisfied with the weapon's performance as a sort of slow to middle tier stagger stick when unpowered, with some kind of ability to kill individual targets, primarily focusing on high stagger cleave and low cleave damage. It does lack sufficient first target killing power for a giant hammer, and we will want to address that. However, when powered, the Thunderhammer should obviously be an obliterator of anything hit. That doesn't mean everything hit, but it does mean each individual target should pretty much always die. Now, let's tighten this up into a proposal. We're going to be focusing attention mostly on the special attack. Of all the weapons where the power on-off toggle exists, the Thunderhammer feels the most natural, with an obvious split between using the powered attacks for key targets and not using powered attacks for trash mobs. However, there have been serious and consistent reliability problems that we need to address. So I'm going to break this into 2 phases. Phase 1. The reach on the weapon feels overly short, almost as short as swinging a Mark 12 chain axe, so let's stretch this heavy two-handed weapon out a little bit and let it get some distance on its hits. This will add safety as it will space out incoming enemy attacks and make for easier kiting. 2. The Crucius needs a small amount of cleave on special to avoid wasting key shots into Groaners when enemies overlap. I think literally 1 would be sufficient while preserving its downsize and identity compared to the Iron Helm. Remember, there's 2 Thunderhammers right now, Crucius and Iron Helm. The Crucius has no cleave on heavy special attack or light special, whereas the Iron Helm can cleave about 5 Groaners. 3. Both the Crucius and Iron Helm need radically improved breakpoints for light special attacks to allow reliable kill kills on body shot against scab and drag shotgunners and trappers. Additionally, both weapons should be able to one-shot headshot with charged lights against scab and drag gunners. Maybe a little bit of buffs required on that point, but I think that should be really accessible for both of these weapons if we want them to be good. Number 4, both the Crucius and Ironhelm need improved carapace armor damage compared to now. They should be the chief slaughterers of this armor type with no true competitor. One-shotting on maulers and crushers with thrust on heavy attacks should be expected. 5. Small first target improvements for damage against light elites and specialists when using unpowered attacks for both light and heavy attacks. It just feels too weird to swing a giant two-handed great hammer and deal a pittance of damage. However, predominantly these targets should be dealt with via special light attacks. Number 6. Right now, I think the Crucius and the Ironhelms have slightly different self-stun times. Let's just normalize this out. All the types should be set to the lower standard that the Ironhelm has of 0.6 seconds. Number 7. For the Crucius only, heavy special attacks should deal an AoE stagger shockwave in a small radius when they stop on a target, such as a specialist or elite, but not when cleaving light targets. Light special attacks should not do this. There is really no concern here with feel overlap of the Indignatus Crusher, as the Crusher has no self-stun and is a much more mobile and stagger-based profile, while this will remain a single-target, damage-oriented profile. Thus, the Crusher will always be more multi-target oriented, and the Thammer will be single-target oriented. The stagger on the Crucius is meant to just give a little bit of extra safety in exchange for the reduced cleave, thus differentiating these weapons a little bit better. Okay, now that's phase 1, and that should get us to a position where the special attacks are actually killing things properly. Before everyone goes worrying about whether or not this is going to be way OP, I'll just remind you that the Mark 12 Chain Axe actually has most of these breakpoints on its special attacks and some of its heavy attacks, which is pretty crazy by comparison. However, also, if you do a little bit of quick math here, we're talking about single target kills, not cleaving multi-blows. These are single target kills. They can only swing so fast. You're looking at about, I think I did the math at roughly 2.5 seconds per kill. So you're only going to have a linear curve on number of enemies. It's going to always take you more and more time to kill more and more enemies. So everybody else will have a chance to participate. You're never going to walk into a room full of crushers and kill them all instantly. You're always going to have to charge up, pair another swing, and deliver it. But the feel of the weapon is going to radically improve, and I think the real effectiveness of the weapon will improve too. For phase 2, we're going to start looking at making some enhancements to the weapon overall. I'd like to split self-stun into 2 modes: light attack self-stun and heavy attack self-stun. I think we can reduce light special attacks down to, I'd say, about 0.3 seconds. It's about half. Keep in mind that you're not going to be knocking over the really big targets with these lighter attacks. They're not going to have enough damage for that, so you're not going to be trying to repeatedly use them into large enemies. You're still going to go for your heavy attack. The heavy attack should probably stay at 0.6 seconds of self-stun. This is all for special attacks again. Number 2, I think we need to reevaluate the breakpoints of special attacks whenever we get to phase 2, just in case things have moved around a lot. That should always be sort of kept in mind. Number 3, I'd like to review normal unpowered attacks at this point and just see that they're not lagging too far behind other weapons. Let's make sure that they feel decent as a weapon, even unpowered. I'm not saying it should be amazing. Its horde clear potential should be pretty bad, but it should still have the ability to be used unpowered and still feel like an actual weapon instead of the nerf bat it feels like now, and this would be a good time to review that and make sure we land that. Number 4, enemies hit by light special attacks should ragdoll per the current behavior when they're killed, but maybe a little extra velocity just for the funny bonks. Really gotta bring that back. Number 5, enemies hit by heavy special attacks should explode in a manner consistent with the bolter and plasma gun, except there should be additional VFX for the energy discharge and directionality for the explosion consistent with the orientation of the swing. What I mean by this is, when an enemy dies with a heavy powered swing, I want to see pink mist sailing away from me and my hammer blow. Number 6, remove the thrust blessing. Number 7, add damage to the base heavy profile in part or in whole, whatever needs to be done. Add the remainder to natural staged heavy attacks. So what I mean by that is essentially we're going to take thrust and make it just part of the weapon so we can have real blessings instead of having the must pick blessing. Alright, now that is my full proposal for the Thunderhammer at this time. Now, not everyone's going to agree with me on this. I know that already because we've had lots of conversations across the web about this already for like the last year. Don't get me wrong, I understand. This is my proposal, and I'd love it if something like this got picked up and implemented. However, there are other proposals on the table, such as like getting rid of the self-stun mechanic or changing the way dodges work around the self-stun mechanic. I understand that, and maybe those ideas are good as well, but this is how I would do it. And the reason I would do it this way is because it moves the needle closer to something that the Thunderhammer should be, which is a really killy bonk stick, and it does so without moving very far away from its original design. And I think the original design makes a lot of sense, and the question is really more, can we get the original design of high cost, high reward attacks to work in the current balance of Darktide where there's so many enemies that need to be killed sequentially. Maybe we can, and if we can, that's going to be awesome, because then we can balance a weapon that feels very different than all the other weapons of the game. If we can't pull it off, then we're going to be looking to redesign the weapon entirely so that it's able to handle more numerous enemies. And I think that's just the reality of the situation. This would be how I would try to do it without moving the bar too far away into redesign territory. With that, thanks so much for visiting, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Bye-bye.